Morning, ladies, gentlemen. Here we are again on what is, for the time being, the last one of these I'm going to be doing, because I've got a lot of work on for the next couple of weeks, and then I'm off to La Belle, France, where I will be continuing to wear my shorts and hopefully appreciating fine wine, fine weather, and fine company when Andrew and Libby come up. So what's been going on in the past? Well, still doing my writing, still doing my bits and pieces. Started on a new project, which will probably appeal to a lot of people here. I've been asked to do a series of books using photographs of RAF aircraft, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Why have I been asked to do that? Is that a number of years ago, I was left in the will of a former RAF warrant officer. I joined the Air Force as he left. His name was Dave Howley, who throughout his Air Force career, and here's a lesson for all of us, I wish I'd done it, he took a camera everywhere and he took photographs of all the aircraft that he saw at the various stations. He was a big modeler. And as a result, this photograph archive is absolutely massive. And the great thing about it also is he's actually put down where the photograph was taken, the serial number of the aircraft and the squadron of the aircraft. And the quality of the photographs, to give you some sort of idea, here's one of them, and I know it's not Royal Air Force, but it's a Royal Navy Phantom. And for those of you in the know, the Royal Navy stopped using the Phantom and handing them over to us. Speaking to our chairman, he said he, being an air defender, he used to fly and had flown a number of the Navy Phantoms. And he said it was quite amazing. He said because they had special nose wheel steering, as opposed to the land-based Phantoms. He said you could turn them on a sixpence. There are also some very, very nice photographs of lightnings for those people who are lightning fanatics. And again, our chairman, I sent them to him, and he had a story about a number of them. One of the most interesting ones, and I hope he doesn't mind me telling you this, I sent the photograph and he said, oh yes, I knew this aircraft. He said the day before that aircraft was lost, when the pilot had to eject, he said I came off the runway and had suffered 2 burst tires. Burst tire was not too much of a problem, but the next day this flying officer took the Lightning up, and he couldn't get his undercarriage back down again, so as a result had to eject. And he said the first he knew about it, this is our chairman, he said he was taxiing out to go up to RAF Lucas and saw this helicopter land and this dejected flying officer jumping out of the aircraft. Not his fault, obviously, but you know, it just shows to show that every photograph has a story to it. So what am I going to talk to you about today? Something a little bit different. Hopefully I sort of got you all excited by the names. The Germans were quite good, like we call them Spitfires and Hurricanes and Lancasters and Wellingtons. The Germans also gave their aircraft names. For instance, the Focke-Wulf 90 was known as the Butcher Bird. The Messerschmitt 109 never really had a nickname because they used to name it Emil or Friedrich after the various numbers. But as the war went on, some of these other aircraft were given some very strange names. There was an aircraft called the Backham Natter, an aircraft which was more like a rocket, which was fired up vertically off a ramp. It had a nose full of rockets, and the idea was as it went through the bomber formation, it would launch off these rockets to shoot down American bombers, and then the nose would detach, and the pilot would come back down with the rear part of the aircraft on a parachute. The Natter actually meant Viper, which is quite an interesting name. So, but what I'm going to be talking to about today are 2 aircraft which came into the end of the war. Didn't really do much because there weren't that many of them, but they each had a different name. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is this one. This is what was the Germans called the Owl, the Uhu. And for those in the knowledge, the Uhu is also a type of glue at the moment. It was described as an unattractive creation by the RAF after the war, but it could have been, if it had come in earlier, one of the most effective nocturnal night fighters of the war. Why? I'll tell you why. The actual aircraft designation was the Heinkel 219. It was a twin-seat, twin-engined aircraft, which basically had a gun pack underneath it. The Germans entered the war like we did with no bespoke night fighters. It was a case of readapting a number of aircraft for the night fighter role. And as early as August 1940, Heinkel came up with this idea of a revolutionary 2-seat twin-engine, high-speed heavy fighter, which could also be used for bombing. The Germans coming up with more than one for it. And the idea was it was hopefully going to replace the Messerschmitt 110, because the Messerschmitt 210 and 410, which were the intended replacements, weren't that good. What really got things going was the escalation of Bomber Command's nocturnal attacks at the end of 1941. And it was then that the German Air Ministry said, right, we're going to have to get on and do something about it. It was designed and was to be built right in the north of Germany at Rostock. And for those of you who go back onto one of my talks, the Baedeker raids there, that was one of the targets. So as a result of that, the bombing of the Heinkel factory actually hampered production of the Heinkel 219. As a result, the first time this aircraft flew was November 1942, powered by two Daimler-Benz engines, which were quite powerful, and they were actually quite surprised. The results, which were unusual for a German prototype aircraft, were good right from the start. It was then flown to the German trials establishment in the north of Germany, where it was fitted with quite a hefty armament. Initially, two 20mm guns were mounted in a pack under the fuselage, with two 13mm guns in the rear of cockpit. But this was then changed, God forbid, to those who were on the receiving end, to four 30mm cannon. It was also fitted with radar, so it was actually doing quite well. So the initial order then came through for the Owl was 100, and that was placed even in August 1942. And this was raised by another 200 in April 1943. They were then given for operational trials to a night fighter unit based in Venlo in Holland. And it was given to that unit because it was being commanded by a very, very experienced night fighter pilot, a guy called Werner Streib. Now, he had been a night fighter pilot following on from a day fighter pilot right from the start of the war. So he was an ideal person to give you some sort of idea. By January 1943, he'd shot down 40 aircraft. And he was already the recipient of the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross. Ideal guy in which to do it. So it did its first outing was the night of June 11th, 1943, and actually it surpassed what the Germans hoped. That night, Bomber Command launched 783 aircraft against Dusseldorf, with minor attacks going on around. 43 RAF aircraft failed to return, with 5 of them being shot down by Werner Streib on the first operational sortie of this aircraft. To give you some sort of idea, he took off with a very experienced radar operator in the back from Venlo, just gone midnight. He was flying the 9th prototype aircraft. He was controlled from the ground by a very experienced ground controller. So unfortunately, those RAF aircraft he was coming up to didn't really have much of a chance. His first victim was a Halifax of 408 squadron flown by Pilot Officer Arthur Grant, which crashed near Romand. Those of you must have served at Bruggen must have remembered Romand. Next was a Lancaster of 12 squadron flown by Sergeant Bob Hyatt, which he shot down near Rheinberg. The next one was a Halifax of 158 squadron flown by Sergeant Ron Pope, which he shot down just outside Nijmegen. Kill number 4 was another Lancaster of 115 squadron flown by an experienced bomber pilot, squadron leader Doug Fox DFC. And 6 minutes later, he shot down a Halifax of 78 squadron flown by Flight Sergeant Frank Hemmings at a place called Sandbeek. On its first outing, the Heinkel 219 resulted in the deaths of 31 RAF aircrew, with another 4 captured. However, it didn't actually go the way they wanted to. Being a prototype aircraft, it wasn't combat proven, and coming back into land at Venlo 2 hours after taking off, it suffered flap and cockpit instrument failures, and Streib was forced to crash land the aircraft, the cockpit section breaking away, which was intentional, and the crew suffering minor injuries. Obvious now that aircraft would go into production. It started to arrive on main units in August or September 43, losing its first aircraft in September 43, which was flown by another experienced night fighter pilot. He was hit by return pilot from his intended victim. The guy's name was Heinz Struning. He himself had shot down 40 aircraft. This was his 40th aircraft. He was wounded, but his radar operator hit the tail on bailing out. Now, this is where it becomes very, very interesting, is that because the Heinkel 219 was expected to have ejector seats, and these ejector seats were actually used in combat. It was the first aircraft to ever be successfully fitted with and to use in combat ejection seats. The first use on operations came on the night of April 11th, 1944, when two German crew were forced to bail out when they were attacked by an intruder over their airfield. This was a Mosquito of 239 Squadron, flown by another experienced pilot, Squadron Neville Reeves. His report is quite interesting because obviously this is a claim to fame here. And he said as follows: when 7 miles north of Aachen, the navigation lights of an aircraft flying west to east were seen some 6 to 7 miles away. The Mosquito turned towards it, losing height to 13,000 feet, but the navigation lights were doused. Mosquito continued flying west and contact was obtained, but then lost to interference. Aircraft turned back towards Aachen, climbing to 16,000 feet, and another contact was obtained. Endeavouring to close in, a further head-on contact was seen of what he thought was a Dornier 217, understandable, twin-tail, twin-engine, which is exactly like the Heinkel 219. Aircraft fired at 150-yard range, and strikes were seen all over the enemy aircraft, which immediately burst into flames. Mosquito peeled off to avoid collision. Enemy aircraft blazed fearlessly and was seen to hit the clouds with a spectacular flash. 2 parachutes were seen descending into the crowds. And these were the ejectees who came out of that aircraft. These were two NCO pilots, a guy called Herter and a guy called Perbix, both of whom survived. A number of combats now continued like that, but of course it was always very, very difficult as the war was going on, because the Allies were putting more and more night fighter aircraft over German airfields. But again, the Heinkel 219 was actually found to be quite effective against the Mosquito. There was a special unit formed with the Heinkel 219, and its task was to shoot down Mosquitoes, which it did with quite success. The first kill being the 6th of May 1944, when a 109 Squadron Mosquito, flying by Squadron of Harry Stevens, a DFC, and Flight Lieutenant Norman Friedman, which were returning from an attack on Leverkusen, they were shot down again near Roermond by a Heinkel 219 flown by, guess what, another experienced German night fighter pilot. However, as you can see, these successes are coming towards the end of the war, and by the end of the war, about only 340 Heinkel 219s were built, of which only 195 were delivered to operational units. It's no, if I'm not surprised that many were captured at the end of the war, and the Royal Aircraft Establishment of Farnborough managed to get hold of 5, which they brought back to Farnborough to evaluate. Captain Eric Winkelbrand, that very, very famous test pilot, commented that, and again, his comment about the aircraft was the cockpit was outstanding and it was a good all-weather aircraft. He concluded by saying, though, I would say that this Heinkel fighter's reputation was somewhat overrated. It was basically a good night fighter in concept, but suffered from what is perhaps the nastiest characteristic that any twin-engine aircraft had. It was underpowered. Furthermore, it appeared to be short on performance to deal with Mosquito, a task for which it was in part its raison d'etre, but it was surely a very unpleasant handful for any 4-engine bomber to encounter. One is led to wonder what changes might have taken place in the night skies of Germany had the Germans been so resolutely opposed to this Heinkel creation, or had the Heinkel organization proven capable of the delivery of a Heinkel 219 in quantity. Very interesting thing to say, what if, but again, as per normal with a lot of these German aircraft, a little bit too little too late. Now that's the Owl. Now the other aircraft, which doesn't really make it much further, but again, it's got an interesting history. It had a number of names, and here's a photograph of it, and you would have seen it there. very unusual aircraft in that it is wooden, apart from the engine, of course. The Germans called it a number of names. It was called the Sparrow or Spatz. It was called the Salamander. It was even called, where it was called Crayfish, but it was, again, another revolutionary design. It was the Heinkel 162. Now, this has a very, very interesting and very, very fast history. Second week of September 1944, the German Air Ministry issued the requirement for a lightweight fighter, an inexpensive fighter, to be powered by the engine you see on the back of turbojet. No other engines. It had to be the BMW 003 turbojet because they wanted other engines for other aircraft. It was also to be made of materials which were in plentiful supply. Amazingly, this wooden aircraft was, well, to give you some sort of idea, it was constructed from non-essential materials, namely wood, could be mass-produced, and the Germans hoped that they could produce this at a rate of 1,000 a month. They specified that it would be powered, it would have a single cannon or two cannon in the nose, again 30mm cannon, which gives it a hell of a punch. Now, it was the second week of September 1944 was when the Germans asked to deal with it. The first prototype got airborne on December the 6th, 1944, 90 days after the specification was issued. Amazingly, up until then, plentiful supply of wood, plentiful supply of engines, everything was going well. But on the first test flight, flown by Heinkel's chief test pilot, as he got airborne, the undercarriage door broke away, apparently due to the wooden door being inadequately glued together. He also reported the aircraft tended to pull to the left, but the engine performed well, and it could climb at quite a speed. Buoyed was by this, which was deemed to be a success, on December the 10th, so 4 days later, he demonstrated the aircraft to high-ranking Luftwaffe officers and party officials down in Vienna. It was being built in Vienna because that was far enough away, it was hoped, from Allied bombing. After what was a very, very successful display, the German pilots decided to finish by a low-level, high-speed pass over the airfield and began rolling. And as he went into the roll, an aileron broke off and the aircraft hit the ground just outside the airfield boundary, killing the pilot. The Luftwaffe again blamed the glue, and this was again thanks very much to the RAF and the United States Army Air Force, because what they'd done is they bombed the factory which had made this glue, forcing this company to relocate and to rush their glue production, which was a substandard alternative. Despite this crash, though, wings were ordered to be strengthened. The speed and full control limitations were imposed, and they put these little things. They proposed. If you look at it on the end of the aircraft, if you see there's a little sort of flick that goes down. That was imposed by an aerodynamicist, which actually controlled the roll on the aircraft. And it gave it much better. They then did a few little changes for the center of gravity, and then fitted the two 30mm cannons, which was what they actually put in the first prototype, and the standard fit of 20mm cannon was also put on other aircraft as well. Now a few little, in our favor, the Allies' favor, we get a few more little problems. Prototypes were then damaged in very, very minor accidents, and the sixth prototype crashed when there was a rudder jammed, and the instability and a possible engine fire was actually caused to be the problem. Again, an engine fire on a wooden aircraft is not a good idea. Nevertheless, it was issued to an operational unit around about the end of January 1945, with the guy who was actually in charge of that unit, Heinz Barr, being a very, very experienced fighter pilot with over 300 victories to his name. Strangely, though, it was suggested that the sort of person who should be flying this throwaway fighter would be Hitler Youth. they would rather use the more experienced pilots to go on the Messerschmitt 262, the Focke-Wulf 190s, the TA-152s. But luckily for those poor Hitler Youth pilots, that never really came to fruition, and it was actually issued to a single unit. That was commanded again by a very, very experienced pilot. He was recovering from injuries, but it was at the end of February 1945 that these aircraft started arriving on this unit. Accidents, because of the unusual ability of the aircraft, followed very, very rapidly. Prototypes catching, engines catching fire, training problems. So really, it wasn't until the end of March 1940, so beginning of April, that the Germans were actually thinking that really maybe time was right for them to actually commit the aircraft to action. And the aircraft flew to the airfield of Lech in northern Germany, where they waited for pilots to arrive, and they waited for the aircraft to go operational. Unfortunately for them, it never really got going. Records at this stage of the war, we're talking about April, we're talking about a month or 3 weeks before the end of the war, were imprecise, but there is the one record of one aircraft being shot down in combat. Very, very difficult to actually be 100% certain, but it was a Hawker Tempest of Treble 2 Squadron, which had gone for a fighter sweep in that part of Normandy, over in northern Germany. And this is the report of Flying Officer Jeff Walkington, who saw something very, very different in the air that day. And you can understand why people nowadays realize what he'd actually encountered. He said, "I was flying, strafing Husum airfield when I sighted an aircraft flying in a northerly direction away from the aerodrome. I immediately broke off my attack on the airfield and chased this aircraft, which was camouflaged mottled green with a yellow understand and appeared to have twin fins and rudders and one engine. The nose of the aircraft had a drooping appearance and the wings resembled those of an Me-109. Being able to gain further, I trimmed my aircraft carefully and around about 3/4 of a ring above the enemy aircraft, fired short bursts. The enemy aircraft then pulled up into cloud. I followed through a gap and passed enemy aircraft spinning down out of control from 3,500 feet. I then watched the enemy aircraft explode on the ground near Husum Aerodrome." It appears who he shot down was a Lieutenant Gerhard Steimer or Feldwebel Gunther Kirchner, who had been scrambled from Lech to intercept these Tempests, but of course were on the receiving end. It was not a good start, and it was the only known combat of that aircraft there. The aircraft did get committed in a number of combats afterwards, but again, records are so imprecise. Whether they got kills or not is not known. But irrespective, at the end of the war, when the RAF arrived at Lech, there sitting on the runway were at least a squadron's worth of Henschel 162s. There were 11 of them which were airworthy. Again, there were no documentation, there were no pilot's notes, and it was left to Captain Eric Winkle Brown to try and get one of these aircraft airborne. And he actually wrote, as a result of this fight, the following: "It would have certainly been an effective gun platform, and its small dimensions would have rendered it difficult to hit. Even if somewhat underpowered, it had good performance. It could certainly have run rings around the contemporary Meteor. However, it was no aeroplane to let embryo pilots loose on, and it would have demanded more than simply a good pilot to operate it out of a small airfield." Sadly, the last one to be lost crashed at Farnborough, killing Group Captain Alan Hards, I believe it was. He was the group captain in charge of that. The aircraft was lost in combat, but again, it was a very, very interesting aircraft to fly. It was quite successful. If it had been there a little bit earlier, as you can see, the worrying thing is it could hold its own against the Gloucester Meteor. And if they'd produced 1,000 of those a month, which was their intention, we, which only had one squadron of Meteors available at the end of the war, would have had a big problem with it. You can see examples of these aircraft. There's a Heinkel 219 in the States, I'm afraid. The RAF Museum and Imperial War Museum each have a Heinkel 162. So if you want to see these revolutionary bird-named aircraft you can nowadays. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's very, very quick 25 minutes through on what is, for the time being, the last talk I'm going to give. If popular demand dictates, Amy may consider it, but you'll have to ask her very, very nicely. I hope that gives you sort of an interesting end of some things that people don't know much about. I know that I think that Brian Fair did ask questions about the Dornier 335 many moons ago. Again, that's another aircraft which, again, with an engine at the front and an engine at the back, it was called an Arrow. It would have been the fastest piston-engined aircraft of anyone in the war. However, too little, too late. Inability to produce them quick enough, and thanks to Allied air power, as you can see, the one that was shot down by the Hawker Tempest just meant that it kept them on the ground or kept them away from the bombers, and as a result, the results were inevitable on the 8th of May 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? I'm all yours.
Thank you so much, Chris. We've had a comment from Jeff. Jeff says, I actually saw this aircraft in the old RAF Cologne Museum. So there we go. And Terry asks, are either aircraft available to view in the museum anywhere? So I guess one question is answered by the other comment. But I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that, Chris.
Yeah, of interest. Apart from the museums, those which I mentioned already, the French actually had a number, and they used to be in a French museum. The French liked operating the Heinkel 162, but I think all the French examples were scrapped. But if it's anywhere, it's in the military museum in the Invalides, but I don't think there is one.
Thank you so much, Chris. There's no more questions. Another very fascinating talk. That's from Andrew. Many thanks for your whole series of excellent and very interesting sessions. So we're very grateful for your support, Chris. And there's lots of people clapping their hands on emojis and putting their thumbs up. So we are very grateful. And we realise that this has been an epic series of talks and that you've dedicated a lot of time to it. But I know your dedicated fans who join this session every week will be disappointed to miss you for a little while.
Those are around. I'm actually going to the museum at Bentley Priory tomorrow. It's the first talk, Friday talk, which they've done since March. It's socially distanced, so instead of 50 people in one room, we're going to have 25 people in one room, but 2 talks. They are trying to get a bit of normality back again. So tomorrow I'll be talking about the cult of the German fighter, which again we did sort of cover about many moons ago, because my next book is due out at the end of October, and that is about all the German fighter races in the Battle of Britain, and is trying to explain to people this will be the first talk that Bentley Priory has had. And again, if people don't know what Bentley Priory was, they could be taken out and shot. Amy, what was Bentley Priory? Headquarters of Fighter Command.
That was really mean.
Yeah, I've got to catch you out. But no, and it's the first Luftwaffe talk that they've had. It's those remember Bentley Priory, and I know that the number of people who have served there, no doubt Andrew Neil. It used to be a beautiful officers' mess. The grounds is now apparently a very impressive housing estate, but they've kept the museum, they kept the officers' mess as a museum, and you can go and visit it. So you have a look up when things are better. If everybody wants to go to that, it's a place I've never been to apart from in my time during the service.
Thank you, Chris, and honestly, thank you so much. We've had loads of really nice comments just saying thank you, so we're really grateful for your time. We hope your talk goes well tomorrow. Your first real live talk, how very exciting. It's a good job you practiced with us all these many weeks.
And I won't be wearing shorts tomorrow.
No ankles will be seen at Bentley Priory. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have got another series of events going on, and we're building up to Battle of Britain week, where we've got loads of different activity going on, but it should be really good. So look out for those emails as normal, and any questions you can email opconnect, so that's OPCONNECT @rafa.org.uk. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. Thank you so much everyone else, and we'll have a lovely weekend.